Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to watch Caesar in Gaul. The whole video is a Roman history documentary from Kings and Generals. I'm gonna break this up in parts and we're gonna continue this Caesar journey like we did with Napoleon, which we still are continuing because we still have, if Epic History is going to do more in Napoleon in Egypt, and we have marshals, right? Which I'm pretty excited for. But this will be also very interesting. We have seen the rise and continued rise of Caesar, right? Original videos down below. Let's go.
The Gauls were one of Rome's oldest and most bitter enemies. They had sacked Rome and throughout the centuries fought alongside the Republic's most dangerous adversaries, including Pyrrhus and Hannibal.
That's
true. By the end of the 2nd century BC, southern Gaul was largely subdued. However, there was still tension in northern Gaul, particularly along the Rhine. These tensions would ultimately climax in the Gallic Wars, the conflict that would shape the future of Western Europe for centuries to come, giving rise...
I mean, that's like an understatement, right? Because, I mean, nowadays France is Gaul back then, and the Rhine separates from the Germanic tribes and the Gauls, and the Romans never really crossed the Rhine and hold a firm position there for long. I believe there's 1 or 2 legions that totally disappears when they're stationed either near the Rhine or on the other side of the Rhine. They just disappear, right? So, I mean, that's an understatement, but that's very true.
Rise to the Holy Roman Empire and modern-day France. The conflict that would forever etch the name Gaius Julius Caesar in the annals of history.
Yep.
Rome had been rocked by almost half a century of civil wars, and the Republic was in decline. Both Marius and Sulla had marched on Rome, highlighting the ineffectiveness of the system for maintaining a large empire, and the fact that the legionaries were more loyal to their generals than to the state.
That is very true.
Following this chaotic period, 3 men had established an unofficial alliance to effectively control the Republic.
Yep.
This was the first triumvirate, consisting of the famous general Pompey the Great, the richest man in Rome, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. Caesar had been consul the year before in 59 BC, but his political campaigning had left him in debt and made him many enemies in Rome. He needed to make money fast and gain enough military success to keep his political adversaries at bay. When the time came for distributing provinces for Caesar to govern as proconsul, he was able to use his political allies to secure Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and Transalpine Gaul for an unprecedented 5 years.
Yep.
This put Caesar in control of 4 veteran legions, the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, all of whom had fought with Caesar before in Hispania and were loyal to him. They had a total of roughly 22,000 legionaries, plus auxiliaries. Caesar now had the men he needed. All he needed was an excuse for war. So, we're beginning here because we've already seen what he talked about was the Helvetii, which Caesar fought, which we saw, and he fought now Ariovistus and defeated him, right? With the help of Publius Crassus, right, and Labienus, right, and we saw that in the previous part, so we're gonna continue from here, after that battle. With the Germanic threat dealt with, Caesar would be able to turn his attention to Gaul proper. The Belgae were a loose collection of various tribes, and had fought constant wars with the Germanic tribes across the Rhine, which had fostered a strong and experienced warrior culture.
And I mean, the Belgae, I mean, I don't know if the name is probably the thing that, the name and the land is probably the thing that connects Belgium to Belgae today, right? And Nervi, I think I recognize that tribe as well. I don't know from where though. Huh. Interesting. Okay, but look how much land Caesar has gotten, right? Wow.
They knew of how successful Caesar had been in Gaul already and were justifiably suspicious of his intentions. To counter the rising Roman threat, the Belgae formed a confederation led by King Galba of the Suessiones.
Huh. That's smart. Unite against a bigger threat. Makes
Labienus
sense.
sent word of this coalition to Caesar in Cisalpine Gaul, who immediately took action. Caesar raised a further 2 legions and moved straight to the Belgae border. It is worth noting that Caesar now had 8 legions under his command, approximately 44,000 men including auxiliaries, double the amount he had initially been allocated by the Senate.
Exactly.
Furthermore,
Remember, I mean, that's another step. Conquering land and all that, that's a step for the Senate to hate Caesar, right? Raising 2 more legions, that's a further step, right? No wonder they hated him so much, right? And they saw him as he was trying to make himself a king, right? Obviously, he dictator, but king was more, because a king was something that the Romans saw as a permanent ruler, instead of a dictator who wasn't a permanent leader, right? Someone was elected to become a dictator for a while to make stuff go faster, right? But a king, which Rome was founded with kings before, but then they become too corrupt and whatever, and then the Republic came, right?
while the Belgae raising an army could certainly be seen as a potential threat, Caesar made no efforts to get the casus bellus he had when fighting the Helvetii and Suebi.
Interesting.
The Republic had less and less control over Caesar, and many in Rome were beginning to talk about these conquests not being in Rome's best interest, but in Caesar's.
I mean, you can see that, right? The Belgae are forming a confederation, but does Caesar have the how does Caesar have the notion of they're going to attack Rome's territory? Right? Does he? I mean, it looks like he's trying to get a fait accompli, right? He's justifying attacking them because he's saying, oh, they're going to attack us, so let's attack them before they attack us. Which is a common strategy throughout the centuries up until near the end of First World War. Even in World War II, slightly.
Caesar marched his legions quickly into the territory of the nearest Belgic tribe, the Remi, who were completely taken aback by the speed at which the Romans had been able to mobilize and surrendered instantly, swearing to Caesar that they had never been a part of the Confederation. The Remi even provided Caesar with all the information they had on the alliance, including which tribes were involved, how many men each tribe was contributing, and that they were currently marching towards the Remi's territory.
Uh-oh.
With this information, Caesar convinced his Gallic allies, the Aedui, led now by Divitiacus, to invade the lands of the Bellovaci, a powerful Belgae tribe, to open a second front, while he marched towards the Belgic Alliance's main army.
Swift. Wow.
Caesar crossed a bridge over the Axona River and encamped in a strong position on a hill on the other side. The river provided protection from the rear, and marshy land at his front made a frontal assault difficult. Furthermore, Caesar had learned his lesson from fighting Ariovistus and left 6 cohorts in a well-fortified position on the other side of the bridge, securing his supply line. With no chance of being starved out from his position, Caesar waited for the Belgae to make their move. Meanwhile, the Belgae had marched to the Remi town of Bibrax, just 8 miles from where Caesar was encamped, and besieged it. Caesar gives the total number of the Confederation as 300,000.
Wow.
However, it is unclear how much this number is exaggerated and how many of these men were currently in the army.
Right, Caesar can. Obviously, Caesar wants to exaggerate the numbers of soldiers. However, he can be right in that there are maybe 300,000 people there, but the fighting men might be 200,000, which is still a lot, but maybe 2/3 are fighting soldiers, or even 1/3, and the rest are like baggage trainee, like women, children, whatever, right? But still, it's a huge force.
A more realistic estimation would be somewhere around 80,000 men, still a force
Yeah.
to be reckoned with, almost
Yep.
double that of Caesar's. In the face of such a large force, the Remi sent messages to Caesar saying that they would be unable to hold the town without his help.
Okay.
Caesar, however, was reluctant to give up his defensive position, as he thought that the attack on Bibrax was a trap designed to force him to do that. Instead, he kept his legions in camp, but sent a substantial contingent of auxiliaries, composed mainly of Cretan archers and Balearic slingers, to sneak into Bibrax to help the Remi.
Balearic slingers, we saw those in the Roman wars against the Punics, right? But they were on Carthage side, I think, the Balearic slingers. Right? That's pretty cool. And Cretan archers. That's pretty cool.
With Bibrax thus reinforced, and Caesar not taking the bait, Galba instead marched his army to meet the Romans, encamping just 2 miles from the Roman camp. Caesar was reluctant to engage Galba straight away, and instead focused on cavalry skirmishes to test the strength of the Belgae. While this was going on, he further reinforced his position, digging long trenches and constructing defensive towers on the flanks of his position.
I mean, that's a very classic Caesar move. Engineering, bridges, towers, trenches, everywhere. Right? Which, of course, you need that, right? Impressive.
Realizing that attacking such a strong position would be suicidal, Galba instead sent roughly 15,000 to 20,000 men to ford the river and attack the 6 cohorts on the other side, hoping either to draw Caesar from the hill or to cut off his supply line and starve him out. Seeing this, Caesar gathered all his light infantry and cavalry and marched quickly to oppose the crossing, leaving his legions in their defensive position. The Roman cavalry arrived just in time and fell upon the few Belgae who had made it to the other bank, killing many and forcing them back into the river. At the same time, the Roman missile troops peppered the Belgae still in the water with stones, javelins and arrows. They doggedly tried to continue their crossing despite taking heavy casualties, but Galba had no choice but to pull his men back. To make matters worse, word had now reached him that the Aedui were rampaging through the Bellovaci lands. With the Romans to his front so heavily dug in, and with another army now threatening his flank, Galba decided to withdraw.
Smart.
The tribes would all disperse to their respective homelands, but all agreed to reassemble if the Romans marched further into Belgae lands.
That's smart of them, yeah. Good for them.
As the Confederation's army dispersed, Caesar cautiously pursued with his cavalry and 3 legions under Labienus, harassing the Belgae. Due to their lack of coordination, the Belgae suffered heavy casualties in this retreat. The battle had cost the Confederation approximately 10,000 men and had forced the tribes to divide, making them easier for Caesar to conquer.
Divide and conquer,
Many tribes simply surrendered in the face of the Roman legions, including the Bellovaci and Galba's Suessiones. However, deeper in Belgae territory, the Nervii did have the time to organize and were not going to give up so easily. They were outraged by Caesar's foray into Belgae territory, and alongside their neighbours, the Virumandui, Atrebates, and Aduatuki were able to gather an army of approximately 50,000 men, led by the Nervii king, Bodugnatus.
Epic showdown now, right?
Caesar, hearing that this force was gathering against him, marched for the river Sabis on the edge of Nervii territory. Bodugnatus had learned the lesson from Galba and knew that he could not allow the Romans the chance to fortify their position, and so he positioned his men in ambush on a hill on the other side of the river. He also had his troops construct hedge-like obstructions, which were placed on the other side of the river to disrupt the Roman formations and cavalry. Caesar marched his army in two groups. His veteran 6 legions, who marched in the front, were the first to reach the river, and began constructing a camp on the hill with the river in front, while the 2 newer legions marched behind with the baggage train.
One thing though, about Caesar's opponents, they learn from their mistakes, right? And they're not these barbarians as the Romans sees them as, right? Same with the Germanic tribes east of the Rhine, right? Ariovistus, right? They're not these barbarians. Maybe if you compare them to maybe the cities in the Roman Empire and the cities in these tribes, sure, right? Sure. But I mean, in the military sense, they're not, right? Okay.
Caesar sent his cavalry and light infantry across the river, which was only 3 feet deep, in order to scout the opposite bank. They were met by some Nervii cavalry, and a brief skirmish broke out. However, the Belgae cavalry fell back, drawing in the Romans until the entire Nervii force broke cover and fell upon them.
Wow.
The Roman cavalry and light infantry broke and ran back across the river to the Roman camp, the
they're
Nervii
smart.
army in hot pursuit. Thus started the Battle of the Sabis River.
Wait, I mean, how do you keep... I understand that they are not keeping that formation, right? The Belgae, the Nervi. But I mean, how can you even keep a small part of the formation like that when you're crossing the river and going downhill? I mean, impressive if they did that, right?
The Belgae moved from the woods and across the river so fast that the legions had almost no time to prepare. However, their experience and discipline kicked in. Rallying to the nearest cohort and legionary standards, they were able to put together a coherent battle line.
I mean, that's why you have the eagles with the French, right? That's why you have these standards, these flags, right? Flag carriers. So you can rally around them and put you in formation. Even though you might be in the wrong legion or whatever, right? Wrong group. Doesn't matter, right? Stand in formation, right?
But as the legionary engineers did not have time to clear the campsite as they usually would, the legions were divided by the hedge-like obstructions laid down by Bodugnatus, which prevented them from forming a cohesive formation.
Right.
As a result, the legions were almost fighting 3 separate battles. The 10th and the 9th on the left against the Atrebati, the 11th and 8th in the centre against the Virumandui, and the 12th and 7th on the right against the largest group, the Nervii, with 2 remaining legions still with the baggage train yet to join the battle.
That's reserves for
the fighting
Caesar,
was
but
brutal, with Caesar himself going from group to group, encouraging his men. Eventually, the Roman left was able to push their enemy back enough to hurl their javelins into their ranks and charge. They were able to force the Atrebati back across the river, even making it into the Belgae camp.
But now, one problem though, now they're going to push too far. Are they not? They're going into their camps, pillaging, plundering, whatever, right? They need to not lose cool. They need to go back and help the rest of the army. Otherwise, your victory is minute, right? Compared to the loss Caesar might be getting here, right?
center was also finding success, pushing the Viramandui down to the banks of the river.
Okay, that's good.
However,
But
the Roman right was having a hard time.
yeah.
With the center pushing forwards, the Nervii poured into the gap, almost surrounding the 12th and 7th legions and falling upon the auxiliaries who had retreated to the camp.
Uh-oh.
The remaining auxiliaries, including most of the Roman cavalry who had been marching in front of the baggage train, saw this and fled, assuming the Roman right had been completely destroyed and the battle lost. They were not without reason. The 12 had lost their standard, their chief centurion, most of the other centurions, and the Romans were beginning to break. Seeing this disaster, Caesar knew he would have to do something or risk losing the whole campaign. Snatching up a shield, he pushed himself to the front line of the legion, bolstering the morale of the men. With the 7th Legion under heavy pressure as well, Caesar ordered them to form a defensive square with the 12th and hold their ground.
Smart. I mean, look at Caesar. That's why Caesar is one of the great generals. He gets there like Napoleon, like Alexander. Caesar gets himself on the front lines to fight the enemies, even though he doesn't have to, because he's the leader or whatever, right? But he does it because he needs to win the battle, to survive, to raise up morale.
At this point, the battle began to swing in the Romans' favour.
Yep.
Labienus, in charge of the 10th and 9th legions, saw what was happening from the other side of the river and sent the 10th to relieve the Roman right, while the remaining 2 legions had finally joined the battle and were attacking the Nervii in the Roman camp. The Roman auxiliary cavalry also returned to the battle, seeing this change in fortune, and now it was the Nervii who faced disaster. The Viramandui had fled upon seeing the Roman reinforcements, and the Nervii were now surrounded. They fought bravely, and even Caesar commended them later, but their defeat was now inevitable.
Yeah, you can see that.
The Belgae casualties were devastating, Caesar saying that just 500 survived the battle. The Roman losses had also been high, with perhaps as many as 5,000 Romans dead.
But 500 on the Belgae side, I don't think so. But right, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. He under-exaggerates on the amount of casualties on his side, and then exaggerates how many died during the battle on the Belgae side, right? And how many they had. Which is common, but you know.
Without Caesar's personal leadership and the timely interventions of the legions, it is likely that the battle would have been lost, Caesar killed, and the campaign ended. But
that's very
true. The battle was over, and Caesar was once again victorious. The Nervii surrendered, becoming a vassal of Rome, and the Atrebati were conquered soon after. Rome was now in control of most of Gaul. By 56 BC,
but I mean, you can see on the map, right? You see all these different tribes. A lot of them are not a coalition, a confederacy, whatever. They're not working together, right? Because they're competing tribes, right? It's like the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, if the Holy Roman Empire was invaded by someone like Caesar, it would be broken up too. Oh wait, it was, right? By Napoleon, right? This makes sense. This is one of the reasons why Caesar could invade and defeat them. Even though the Belgae tried to unify together and attack Caesar, but it just didn't work, right?
Caesar had subjugated the majority of Gaul, either through conquest or political alliances, and was beginning to look for new opportunities to expand Rome's influence. But not all the Gallic tribes were taking kindly to Roman rule. One such tribe was the Veneti, located in modern Brittany. Despite signing a peace treaty with Caesar the year before, They reneged on this promise and captured a few Roman officers.
Uh-oh.
As a largely seafaring nation, the Veneti were confident that they would be able to put their faith in their navy and force Caesar to make concessions. However,
one thing though, one thing that goes against, I would argue, Alexander the Great, Caesar, and Napoleon is naval forces, right? Napoleon arguably lost quicker because of the British Navy and the loss of his own navy and the Spanish Navy at Trafalgar. Caesar, I mean, he's later, spoilers, he's going to invade Brittany or Britain. Yeah, you can argue he made it and he made ships, but yeah, I don't know. But if they all were in the same seat as Napoleon, Alexander, and Caesar, they will also lose. They would be conquerors on land like they were, but they would be defeated by an island nation, right? But
Caesar spent no time trying to negotiate, instead seeing the act as a direct declaration of war and marched on the tribe.
Right, because why is that a declaration of war? Because as we saw in a previous episode of either Roman history or I think it's Roman history, almost every Roman like diplomat, military leader, officers here, they're not only representing the Roman Republic, but they are the Roman Republic. So if someone captures, kills, whatever, that is an attack on Rome itself, right?
Initially, he found little success. Due to their large navy, the Veneti were able to effectively hop from town to town, moving entire populaces and their belongings, denying the Romans a pitched battle or siege.
Look at that.
Standard Roman tactics proved ineffective, therefore, and it was clear that, in order to win, Caesar had to defeat the navy. With no navy on hand, he ordered that a fleet be built in order to take on the Veneti navy.
There you have the Punic Wars. The Romans can't defeat Carthage. They need a navy. They just build a navy. Give me a navy. Wow, this is very Roman. Very Roman of Caesar, right? Just give me a navy and defeat the navy, right? Okay. Brutus, uh-oh.
But compared to the Roman ships, which were designed for the Mediterranean,
Yep.
the Veneti ships, designed for the Atlantic, were much stronger and taller, and
Yep.
the Romans found them impossible to ram or board. It was only through the ingenuity of one of his legates, Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, who suggested that they use billhooks to cut down the sails and cripple the Veneti boats, that Caesar was able to defeat their navy.
I mean, ingenuity and engineering, again, saves the Romans. They did the same in the Punic War, right? The first Punic War. They had engineering. They weren't the best at ramming because the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, were the better seafaring. They were traders, right? So they had the better ships. So use engineering, right? Same here. Cut down the sails and they can't do anything, right? There you go. But I don't know if this is the same Brutus who later on, you know, spoilers.
With this issue sorted, it now seemed that Caesar would be able to move on to new conquests. Once again, though, his plans were put on hold in 55 BC, when yet another roaming German horde, composed of Usipetes and Tenchtheri, began threatening the Rhine border.
Uh-oh.
These tribes previously rivaled the Suebi, but were now fleeing in huge numbers, Caesar giving their total number, including civilians, as 430,000.
Wow.
They had already slaughtered the Menapii and stolen their ships in order to cross the river, and were now pouring into Gaul.
Uh-oh.
Upon hearing about this, Caesar was once again compelled to act. as he was worried that the Gauls might join the Germans in
Right.
an attempt to oust the Romans.
I mean, yeah, but here also Caesar has a Cassiobellus, so he has a reason to defend his allies, sort of. But the real justification is so they don't turn on Caesar, right? Wow.
Some Gallic tribes
400,000?
in the Rhine Valley
Look at
had
that.
indeed sent emissaries to the Germans, providing them with food and intelligence, encouraging them to move deeper into Gaul. Caesar gathered a council of Gallic chiefs and convinced them to provide more cavalry for him to confront the Germans.
Wow.
This served
Smart.
two purposes. Firstly, Rome's cavalry had always been lacking, and the Gauls were renowned horsemen, and so filled a crucial role in the army. And secondly, because cavalry was composed largely of nobles or wealthy persons,
Right.
they would act as hostages, ensuring good behavior.
Right.
He then gathered 5 of his legions and headed to the Rhine.
Wow. Is this the furthest he has
The
been
Germans
away?
had sent a portion
Wow.
of their cavalry ahead of their main force in order to carry out raiding missions. But hearing that Caesar was getting close, they sent emissaries in order to delay him. They asked Caesar to negotiate, claiming that they were only in Gaul because they had been forced to flee from the Suebi, and promised to ally with Rome if Caesar could provide them with land in Gaul. However, Caesar suspected that the Germans were delaying and continued his advance. The envoys continued back and forth as Caesar continued to progress towards the German camp, sending forward his 5,000 cavalry as an advanced force, but with orders not to provoke them into attack. However, upon seeing the Roman cavalry separated from the main force, the Germans fell upon them.
Wow.
The Romans initially tried to hold their ground, but were eventually overwhelmed and retreated to the safety of Caesar's camp. Caesar likely underplays the amount of casualties taken, giving the number as 74, but he does mention that 2 brothers of the famous and influential Piso family had died in the fighting, something that Caesar could not let go unpunished.
Wow. Fair enough.
Refusing to hold back any longer, Caesar gathered his force to attack the Germans. But before he moved off, the Germans sent a party of diplomats, including high-ranking nobility, to
I mean, I was gonna say, why is there just one cavalry group going there? Okay, makes sense. Emissaries, right?
treat with Caesar, once again asking for peace and apologizing for the attack.
What?
As the Germans had already attacked, apparently without provocation, Caesar
I mean, yeah. Maybe because Caesar is misconstruing what happened, but still, if they attacked the Roman force without provocation, let's say, now they're just trying to keep Caesar from attacking faster than he wants, because the German tribe probably they're waiting to get their cavalry back, right?
Caesar refused and took the delegates as prisoners.
Wow.
He then drew up his army in 3 lines and moved swiftly to the German camp. The Germans, assuming that Caesar still would have been delayed by their envoys, were caught completely unaware. The legions fell upon their camp.
Slaughter.
Caesar brushes over the details, but it seems to have been somewhat of a massacre.
Right.
The fleeing Germans were pursued by the Roman cavalry. Some made it across the river in their boats, but many tried to swim across and drowned.
Wow.
Hearing of the defeat, the German cavalry, which had been pillaging, returned across the Rhine. Caesar's army had taken minimal casualties.
Yeah. I mean, there you saw a little bit of naivety on the German tribes' part, right? They sent the emissaries probably to delay Caesar, right? And maybe to get a peace treaty or whatever. But they were waiting for the cavalry probably, and maybe resting and, I don't know, eating, right? Wow. Slaughter.
It is important to note that while Caesar portrayed this as a great victory against a marauding Germanic horde, this is not how others saw it. To Caesar's political rivals in Rome, Caesar had broken the armistice with the Germans by antagonizing them with his cavalry, imprisoned diplomats, which was effectively a declaration of war, and then carried out a massacre, including civilians.
That is true. However, the massacre of civilians, that's completely true. However, if we are supposed to believe what happened in the order that it happened, Caesar didn't actually attack them. They attacked what was it, that tribe on the Rhine River, and then started to invade, right? So I don't know. Obviously, Caesar's political rivals, almost the entire Senate, I mean, obviously they're just going to say anything that Caesar does is bad, right? Sure.
Caesar needed something to distract the Senate and win the minds of the
Yep.
people, so he decided to boost his popularity by doing what no Roman general had ever done before:
Uh-oh.
crossing the Rhine.
Wow.
The Germanic tribe Ubii offered its ships, hoping that the Romans would assist in their war against the Suebi. Caesar, however, deemed this unworthy of the Roman people, and instead decided to build a bridge across the Rhine between modern Andernach and Neuwied.
Wow.
It was an engineering marvel.
Yeah.
The legion's engineers used winches to act as pile drivers, driving
Wow.
stakes deep into the river, and constructed the 140 to 400 meter by 7 to 9 meter bridge
Wow.
in just 10 days.
In 10 days. Wow.
Caesar found the lands beyond the Rhine almost deserted. Taken aback by the Romans' speed and their feat of engineering, the Germanic tribes in the area had retreated deep into the Germanic forests,
Right.
where they had amassed a significant army. However, Caesar had no desire to be caught in a prolonged campaign in foreign territory against a notoriously dangerous enemy. He spent just 18 days on the German side of the Rhine, burning villages and crop fields before returning and dismantling the bridge.
Wow. I mean, that's just an engineering feat, right? Wow. That's cool. Again, Caesar with his engineers. Wow.
The campaign was a proof, not only to the Germans, but also to Caesar's rivals in Rome, that he could overcome anything and do as he pleased. Caesar's next ambition, Britain, was once again a perfect propaganda target.
Yep.
The island was on the edge of the known world, and rumoured to be a land of monsters and vast riches.
Makes sense.
It had remained effectively untouched, and bringing it into Rome's sphere of influence would be a significant achievement.
Alright, I think we're gonna end it there. In the next part, we're gonna see Caesar in Britain, right? Which they're building up to. A land full of monsters, wow. I mean, if you don't know anything about it, you're probably gonna imagine it being something else, right? But wow, that engineering feat, that's cool, right? He skipped the boats and just built a bridge in 10 days. Wow. Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.